Okay, Alderwoman Davis, you can unmute yourself and begin the meeting.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and we're sorry for the delay. We'd like to call to order our Transportation Committee meeting for February 4th, 2021. Mr. Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Vaccaro. You have to unmute yourself.
I did. I got it now. President.
Vice Chairman Cohen.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderman
Here.
Muhammad. Okay. Alderman
Here.
Oldenburg. Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Present.
Chairwoman Davis.
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg. You have 6 present. A quorum is present.
Thank you very much. I'd like to wait to excuse the alderman, and then we'll move on to our minutes of January 28th.
And I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes of January 28th.
Second.
Been moved and second. Could we please call the roll to adopt these minutes?
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Cohen. Alderman Muhammad.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Chairwoman Davis.
Aye.
Vice Chair Cohen, if you're here.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg, you have 6 aye votes.
Thank you very much. As we are moving forward here, we have no board bills to review. We do have a resolution for review, and that resolution is number 91. And the sponsor is Alderman Joseph Rhodey. And sir, would you like to start with your presentation? Alderman Rhodey.
He's still muted.
I'm sorry. There I go. Sorry about that. Thank you.
All right, sir.
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, thank you for coming back last week from last week so that we could do this before we got out of session. If I could give you a little bit of background, and then I'd like to turn it over to our former colleague, our former Alderman Ogilvie. As you know, I'm not going to be joining you next session. And as I was planning on, this is kind of part of something I've been working on for a couple of years, I guess. When I took over chairman of HUD's, I wanted to go ahead and focus kind of on 2 things. The first one was building the economic viability of the city through economic development. And then, the second portion of that was, the well-being of our residents. And so we spent most of the first several years that I was chairman of HUD's working on incentive reform and trying to get a better hand on how to use it and how the city makes money when we use incentives so that we can begin getting ourselves on a better fiscal footing and more appropriately use that. In the last several years, I think more so than any time since I've been an alderman, we have seen parts of the city where real estate values have grown and economic, some of the new development is happening almost organically. Never had previously had we seen that kind of level of activity. Much of that I've been fortunate to have in my ward. And I know a lot of people say, oh my gosh, it's all the incentives. The incentives certainly have played a role in it, but a lot of what I believe has happened in 17th Ward has been a result of a number of strategic initiatives that we took on earlier many years ago. The cortex is occurring there because it's close to where all kinds of National Institute of Health research is coming. We did expanded historic districts. And one of the components of the several different things that we were doing was we really focused on less car dependency. And we started on that a number of years ago, and it's really starting to have an impact. And I think it's one of the real important contributing factors to development that's occurring in that part of town. We put in a new Metrolink station. We did farm-based codes, which encourage environmentally sustainable development. Some of our newer developments over there, parking ratios on some of the more denser properties are lower than they've ever been. So there's been a lot of things going on there. As we've had this development occurring, we had a discussion at some point of whether or not we should do community benefit agreements. And I really wanted to hold off on that. It seemed like there's a lot of interest in doing community benefit agreements with the focus on doing affordable housing as some of these values began growing. And we wanted to make sure that we maintained the economic diversity of the area. And I deliberately withheld or slowed down the community benefit agreement because I wanted us to have a much more data-driven process to making these decisions. And we are in the process now of almost completing an affordable housing study. And the idea was that we would have a component study which would be studying transportation. And I guess it's my gut feeling, and I'd like to have this, have this vetted, that if we are going to do community benefit agreements, it's my belief that as we explore these things, that we may do far more for our residents and far more to create economic development in the city by focusing those resources on transportation. And I'd like to just give a little bit of a reasoning for this, and then I'll eventually turn it over here in a couple minutes to Scott. When you are going ahead and you're doing dense development like in Cortex, one of the constraints that we have is the number of parking spaces that we need in order to build a building. And we need 4 to 5 parking spaces. And part of that is because we don't have adequate transportation. In cities like Chicago and New York, you need far fewer. The cost of adding a parking spot, 4 parking spots at the difference between a structured spot and a surface spot, the difference is $20,000 if you need 4 of them for a per 1,000 square feet. That's adding over $80 per square foot to your cost. And if we could figure out a way to reduce the parking requirements at the development, we could end up driving down dramatically, our cost, and in turn, we would be raising the values of those buildings, so they would require less incentives, they'd be more valuable, we'd make more taxes off of them, and so forth. And needless to say about the environmental issues and everything else associated with it. The flip side of that is as we get into the affordable housing studies, one of the metrics that they use in affordability, a lot of it's focused on housing, but one of it is housing plus transportation. And when you have good public transportation systems, what you can see happen is the cost of transportation on average for residents in regions that have good public transit starts going down, and that frees up money for them to spend more money on housing. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make in this is not only does it save money for us where the jobs are, but it frees up money for the folks who are going to those jobs to spend on their homes. And one of the biggest challenges when you start trying to think about bringing back are having, kind of the organic development that's happening in the central corridor, north of Delmar or in the southeast quadrant of the city, when people are going to be resisting the growth of property values, that you're going to be running into a ceiling because the development costs just exceed the property values so much that you need to have growing property values in those areas. And if we can go ahead and provide affordable transportation, then that might free up money to give people more money to spend on housing. It moves them from being a renter to an owner. The difference between owning a Metro Pass and actually having to own a car, you're talking about several $100s a month. It's one of these things that it can win in multiple areas, and how we do that and to do it strategically is going to be very important. Alderman Ogilvie and I had been kind of thinking about a pilot project for a couple of years. We've been kind of bouncing around different ideas. At one point, we brought in some microtransit companies. We actually introduced them to Metro. Metro ended up engaging them and kind of taking our idea and using it in other parts of the region. We've been bouncing these things around, and then Scott shared with me a few weeks ago a study that he had come across from Austin that was a much more holistic thing. Instead of trying to do a one-off thing, it really took a view of how do you get. Their goal was to, what's the term they use, Scott? Limit or reduce by 50% the number of single occupied auto routes or for the daily commutes. They had a term that was, really a very strong term, but they had very, very definitive goals. And it wasn't just about, adding another, metro line or adding another bus line. It was a very holistic view. I thought it was just something that would be great for our city and something very, very important. And I guess I'm passing the resolution now where our Director of Economic Development is trying to go out and raise some money with some partners and things. And my concern, I wanted to create a little visibility for this so that, that maybe a year from now before the study is completed, and unless we have some real advocates down on the board, these studies have a way of just being done and collecting dust. And I thought that if we passed a resolution, and got some enthusiasm for it. Scott has a history of being a big advocate for this, and I think he's well placed in city government. But we all, to advocate for this and to do the work and so forth. But we really need people over in the legislative side too. And I thought that if we could go ahead and pass the resolution, and a couple folks we'll keep the pedal to the metal and keep some pressure on SLDC and planning and others so that they know that this is important, and we need to focus on this and get some resources to make this a reality. And it's not the type of thing that is going to be solved with one study or in 1 year. It is the type of thing that has to happen, year in and year out. One of the things that I think we've learned from our work and incentives is that we put in a requirement that SLDC has to come back and report to us once a year on the progress of their economic development plan and on the use and how the incentives are used. And I think it might be appropriate to do something like this, and that way there's this every year reminder that this is important. So with that kind of background, Scott's the one who actually knows far more about the study and has been kind of having conversations with some of our logical partners here in the region. So Scott, if Madam Chairwoman, if it's all right, our former colleague could tell us a little bit more. I'm sorry, you're muted, Madam Chairwoman.
Absolutely, please move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everyone. I'll note that Todd Antoine from Great Rivers Greenway and Jessica Gershman from Bi-State are both on the call as well. And I apologize to Jessica. We were on a panel this morning, so she's going to hear me drone on a little more. So Alderman Rohde touches on a number of points and mentions the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, which is partially the inspiration for this resolution. So I think just to take a step back, let's think about what a strategic transportation or mobility plan is. And in a nutshell, it's an idea that we're going to plan around all modes of transportation at the same time in an integrated, holistic way. And so now in particular, I think is a good time to embark on an effort like this, because we have a lot of the groundwork or the pieces are already in place. So we have a good complete streets policy. We have very ambitious plans from Great Rivers Greenway for the Brickline Greenway and the Hodemont Greenway. We have a successful effort managed by SLDC in the Project Connect area to rebuild a lot of infrastructure that we've been funding. We have a lot of interest around improving safety of the whole transportation system. We have Bi-State who reorganized bus routes more than a year ago to focus on high ridership, to improve frequency on high ridership routes, which was really showing some success before the pandemic hit. We have the 2017 Economic Development Sales Tax, which we've been accumulating funding for Northside Southside Transit expansion for a few years now, and we are about to embark on a new assessment of that corridor to figure out the best way to move forward with transit expansion. And in addition, I've heard from many aldermen that they wish they had a better sense of what the city's overall priorities and strategies were for maintaining and reconstructing our roadways and figuring out what the appropriate amount of funding is to do that every year. So I think, we could all approach this from the point of view that we're most interested in. So I know Alderman Rohde is very interested in the combination of housing and transportation costs. And so lowering transportation costs is a way to lower the overall burden on residents. Some people might be very focused on improving safety. Some people might be very focused on advancing the Brickline projects. Some people might be very focused on setting the correct amount of funding so that we can maintain and improve our transportation system throughout the whole city. I think with a particular focus on areas that have seen less development and therefore have seen fewer transportation upgrades in recent years. And so I think all of those are valid ways to enter this. And so if people are interested, the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan, which was just completed in 2019, is a really good compendium of all of these themes. And it takes them and it puts them all in one place. And it really sets the vision for that whole community, for where they're going in terms of their transportation projects and spending and priorities. And I think it really creates a consensus around the direction that community is moving in. And I think we're at the point where we could do something similar within the city of St. Louis. And I know another aspect of the Austin plan, which Alderman Rohde is very interested in, that he touched on, is they set a mode share goal within that plan to work towards over 20 years. So right now in Austin's about the same as the city of St. Louis in that about 72 or 3 or 4% of commutes to work are by single occupancy vehicle. And that's pretty similar to the city of St. Louis. And so they set a goal to reduce that to 50% by increasing transit ridership, increasing people walking and biking to work, and with the acknowledgement that people are going to be doing more working from home in the future. And so they're counting those non-trips as well in terms of commutes. And the reason to do that, which Alderman Rohde touches on, is if you reduce single occupancy vehicle commutes to work, you can reduce development costs for developers. You can reduce the parking you have to construct. You can improve the environment. You can reduce emissions. You can free up space on the roadways for other modes of transportation. And you can provide lower cost public transportation for people who cannot afford or do not want to own a car. And so you can create, I think, a more equitable, safe, just community by a focus on all these aspects of transportation policy. And so this resolution would be, I think, the first step in doing that. It would establish that it's something we want to do. There would be many steps to come in terms of figuring out how to fund this project. These projects take a lot of community engagement, discussing what our priorities are with residents of St. Louis, and they can take a while to complete as well. And then, of course, implementation is an ongoing thing that happens year after year, where we think about our priorities and work to make sure we have adequate funding to execute on those priorities. So I think that's an overall view. This would be a very collaborative effort between many city departments, as well as key external agencies such as Bi-State and such as Great Rivers Greenway, and also MoDOT, I think, who more and more is willing to come to the table and work with us on transportation projects. And it's, of course, a collaborative effort with the Board of Aldermen and with constituents to talk about how we kind of codify and express what our preferences are in terms of transportation policy for the city. So that's an overview. Maybe I pause here if we have questions or comments, or I'm sure both Jessica and Todd are willing to entertain questions as well.
Alderman Rohde, I'm going to let you guide this process. Would you like to go ahead and have your other speakers speak now, and then I'll have committee members ask questions?
Sure. I think probably good to have them speak now. Scott's kind of been the intermediary, so I'm always a little hesitant to have people say something that I don't know what they're going to say, but hopefully I would think, given their position,
I think we're safe.
I think we're probably safe that they won't completely torpedo our discussion, but sure.
I'll just briefly say that this would need to be a city-led endeavor, but these key partners are, they're key stakeholders in what we do. So they would participate both in terms of their plans that are already on the books that they're already working towards, and in terms of informing us about future plans and establishing. We have great relationships with both, of course, but establishing a more holistic approach to projects in the future.
I agree. And, I've been involved for a while. And so I do understand how important it is for us to have that collaborative effort. So please move forward with your next speakers.
Scott, who do you want to have up first then?
Looks like Jessica's up first.
Sure. I don't think we have anything formal to say, but good morning and thank you for having us. When Scott brought the idea of Alderman Rohde's resolution, I think it just really helps formalize a lot of the relationship and collaboration that we've already been working toward. And a lot of those, wouldn't this be a great idea? And let's put a pin in this to pursue, next year, this put some meat on the bones. So Bi-State would be happy and grateful to participate in a process by sharing our data and our research. As you know, we have we now have a Department of Innovative Services in my planning division at Metro. And so we've got, people that are really trying to think about equity and access and how we can kind of make sure the mobility model suits the needs that are on the ground today. And so we'd love to collaborate on a planning effort like this and support it and the city's goals, however possible.
Jessica, I wanted to ask you, I know a couple of years ago, you were looking at a plan. There was electric cars. I think they seated like 6 people or something, and they were interested in providing that hard to address transportation mode. And I don't know what happened to that when they were talking about it.
So there was a pilot in downtown St. Louis that was led by Downtown STL Inc. With a small, like an electric small vehicle provider. So as Alderman Rohde mentioned, there are a bunch of emerging transportation technology providers in this space internationally, really. And he had brought one vendor in for conversations and maybe more than one, but I remember Transloc, sir. And anyway, so yes, currently we have a pilot going, 2 really, one with a sort of a competitor of that program. It's not electric vehicles, they're, diesel, it's just like a regular minivan, honestly, a branded minivan. And these are in less dense parts of St. Louis County. The idea being when you have a busy corridor with a lot of density and population, you need a bigger vehicle to carry more people. But in the parts of our service area where we don't have a clear street grid and, a lot of sort of cul-de-sacs and less density, but still people need access to transportation. That's where we started to test this microtransit. Basically, if we threw microtransit in an area like Ward 17, we might blow up the demand and not be able to handle it. And so we wanted to test it in areas that felt more manageable, but we're learning a lot from that pilot this year. So we didn't continue that one particular one that was in downtown St. Louis, but it's a similar concept where you summon the ride in real time. And it's a complement to it's not a replacement of, but it's a complement to the core transit network. So, having our buses and our frequent network that Scott alluded to is a critical part of serving, particularly the city of St. Louis. And so this is ways of helping to match the service type with the demand. So making sure we're matching things up properly is part of what we're after. And I think a plan like this that you're talking about for the city, we are looking at mode share and it is more holistic, gets at the same concepts.
Okay, I shouldn't have interrupted, and I'm going to allow you all to continue with your presentation.
Todd, did you want to add anything at all, Todd?
Sure, I'll just say a few words. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, Scott came and talked to me about this a while back, and I've looked at the Austin plan, and I think it is an excellent model for how to look at. You can look at various modes, and in Austin, they're looking at the trail network there, how it can complement the transit node. They recently just passed a initiative for, I believe, a light rail system to be built in Austin, and how I've been talking to our counterparts down there about how the trail network will be interconnected into the transit network that they're planning there in the city. So it's an exciting time for folks in Austin about what's going to be coming. And I just think here in St. Louis, anytime that we have the opportunity to work together with the various agencies as well as city aldermen and other state agency departments and whatnot, it's a good opportunity. So I really am supportive of the effort and hope you all will consider the resolution.
Madam Chairman, I'd just like to finish up one thought, and then,
Yes, sir.
Then we can kind of, if you deem it appropriate, open it up to questions. We had, in the HUD's committee, we had, our mission statement was, I won't read the whole thing, but part of it here I think is really relevant. We facilitate urban development to maintain the economic viability of our city and improve the economic well-being of our residents. To achieve this, and this is what I think is important, to achieve this, we will use planning, zoning to optimize our development opportunities that can be derived from our unique transportation, location, institutional, and other community attributes and competitive advantages. And the reason I say that is if we want to go ahead and get development, for example, north of Del Mar, one of the outcomes is going to be if you want the type of development that we all dream and hope for, that you're going to need growing property values. And how do you do that? You know, and how are we going to do that in a way politically that's acceptable? When you begin thinking about, like, for example, Cortex, something that is unique, you know, what is our competitive advantage? Well, Cortex's success is that it's located next to the WashU Medical Center and the SLU Medical Center where they're doing all this research. If when we spent $3 million of local money, we got some federal matching money, spent $13 million on that metro station, the value of all the land inside the Cortex area went up $1 or $2 a square foot. In essence, that squeezes down the amount of incentive that we need to do development there. In other words, instead of going ahead and plugging the gap between development cost and market value, development cost being high, market value being lower, instead of just plugging that with subsidy, by putting the metro stop in, we in essence grew the value of the land and closed the gap by making everything more valuable. And that's what we mean by going ahead and investing in our unique attributes. For a long time, Scott and I have had a number of conversations about this over the last couple of years. For a long time, I always used to think that the city was like the poor sister of the regions that are supporting metro. And yet we may put in less money. And one way you may look at it is in absolute dollar terms. Another way of looking at it, though, is how much money are we putting in for the 64 square miles that are the city? In other words, if you look at it on the area that's being covered, we're actually paying a lot more on a per square mile basis than either of the other contributors. And what that means is even though the city has lost density, density is still a competitive advantage of the city. And it represents a very unique opportunity for us. And if we're going to put 10,000 more jobs in the Cortex, you know, being able to get people, you know, north of Del Mar is a very short distance to that. And if we can figure out how to do this and begin integrating not only our planning and zoning, but our use of transportation and economic incentives, they all should be planned hand in glove. And, you know, by having a transportation plan like this, hopefully we can do that. And there is lots of really creative things that can come out of this. You know, and if you read the Austin study, I mean, they've created, in essence, their community benefit agreement is anybody working in their dense employment areas is having free transit. Or maybe we can't start that big, but maybe we can make it, you know, where it's we're subsidizing, you know, transit passes for people of certain lower wage levels, so that we can get really creative with these things. We're not going to be able to do everything at once, but you know, having the list in front of us, we ought to be able to figure out some of the you know, big bang for the, you know, what gives us the biggest bang for our buck. So I was really excited when I saw the Austin study, and you know, I think it would be wonderful for us to do something like this. But again, it's meaningless unless there's an element of accountability where we have an annual reporting, and obviously this committee would be the, you know, the right thing to do, right place to have it. I've had conversations with the chairman of the streets committee So he's familiar with it as well. And we've talked to a couple people and I've talked to several people on the HUD committee. So been trying to kind of share this with a few folks. And with that, my comments are complete and would be glad to answer any questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. We'll start with our committee. Alderman Boyd.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Todd, can you remind me who are you with again?
Sure. I work for Gray Rivers Greenway, the regional park district.
Gotcha. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm excited, about this opportunity to have a lot of collaboration with entities that share in the same value of, good quality public transportation. I'm certainly in support of this resolution. I've actually taken a step here in the 22nd Ward to work with Jessica and Lisa over at Bi-State to try to reimagine, the bus routes along MLK and provide bus shelters and collaborate with them in a way that we use capital improvement monies for some of the infrastructure improvements or the, I guess the furniture, which is what the benches or what have you, and bus shelters and other amenities that we need in order to dress up the bus routes and make people feel safe as they're waiting for the bus. So unfortunately, we've been on that for almost 2 years. But it's exciting that it's forthcoming, and I've certainly allocated resources for that. The more people we can get to ride public transportation, certainly the more cars we get off the road, the more money people save. If you don't really have to have a car, man, that's a few thousand.
A lot of saving.
It's a few $1,000s a year that you can save. I didn't have a whole lot of questions. I just wanted to hear from the potential partners in this process. I'm excited about it. I'm excited to hear they're excited about it. I did have, I guess, just one small question, Alderman Rhodey. Is there a target date that you would like to see this plan actually completed?
We discussed that a little bit. I'm sorry, I don't have the resolution up, but I think at one point I talked about maybe the end of the year. I think that's ambitious, just knowing how government works. But I would hope that we could have something, a year to year and a half from now. And that, that when we have it, that perhaps someone would want to follow up in the form of an ordinance and starts requiring an annual report on the progress of it.
Okay, and maybe I should ask another question of Scott. And first of all, I just want to compliment Scott. Scott is a jewel for the city. I mean, this is stuff that he's very passionate about.
Right.
We couldn't ask for a better person to be leading the charge on this. I just want to plug him on that. Scott, you mentioned that we have the transportation dollars, and I think it's been probably at least 3.5, 4 years. I can only imagine there's $20 million or better in that pot. Can we use some of those monies to do planning studies or infrastructure improvements at all that you're aware of?
Right. So you're referring to the economic development sales tax, which we started collecting in the fall of 2017. There's multiple components of that. The transit component is the largest share, which is 60% of that tax. We've been just accumulating that in the bank for North Side, South Side transit expansion because that's going to be a very expensive project. And we need kind of a substantial down payment to really make it financially feasible. So I know people always get a little uneasy when we're kind of sitting on money, but that money is very focused on making that project viable, financially viable in the future when we get there. And so the first expenditure of that money, we're actually just about to start with a North Side, South Side alternatives analysis, which is going to look at, take a careful look at how we could potentially close the funding gaps that we know still exist for that project, or alternatively, how we might provide the same or similar level of service to light rail with a different mode so that we have really an apples to apples comparison. And that's going to involve community engagement and engagement with elected officials. And I think it's going to also educate and inform the community about what the possibilities are. I am extremely excited about that project and that corridor, and it's something I've been interested in and worked on in various capacities for a number of years. And I think we all feel a level of impatience and also a level of urgency in getting it completed. And I'll just emphasize that it is really hard to get these big transit projects done, especially in a place where the state does not support transit. So in a lot of places, we would probably have enough money to move forward right now because the state would frequently step in and fill that funding gap. That's happened in Texas and Minnesota and Washington, where the local community comes up with a healthy portion of the project and then the state recognizes the value and helps them fund it. We don't have that. We're going it kind of alone. So it's taking some time, but patience, if we remain patient, I do think we will get there. And this study that we're about to start with AECOM, and we're doing it jointly with Bi-State, so the transit agency is helping fully manage it. I think it'll really help us get there. So to your question, can we use some of that economic development sales tax? I don't know that I would go to the transit component, but there is, so it's a little above my pay grade to say how we should fund this. We could maybe fund it from the transit component. We could maybe fund it from one of those other sections of that tax. But it does seem probably sensible that is one place we look for funding to complete this study. And we're probably looking at up to $1 million, maybe something like that, maybe a little more to do a study like this, because it has to take in multiple modes. It has to do a lot of assessment. It has to make policy recommendations, has to do a lot of community engagement to, which is time consuming. So, to be a really robust product, it is going to take some money and some time. But I do think, so this is a really long answer, but I think you probably hit on one of the places we'll be looking to fund it.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked that question is certainly if it was easy to do, if that pot of money would have allowed for it, it'd be, real easy to kind of start this, swiftly. Other than that, if this is something that's a priority for whoever becomes the next mayor, certainly we have a budget process coming up. And this could be part of those conversations if we're serious. And I think this is the right thing to do. And we're moving forward in the right direction on this. So I would, hey, if I'm in the forum, I'm going to ask one of the candidates, hey, how do you feel about this? And would this be a priority for you? If so, it needs to be in board bill number 1. Thanks, Scott. That's just my commentary. I don't need anybody to comment. But
thank you, everyone.
I would like to just add that one of the points of when I'm discussing raising the money for this with our director over at SLDC, one of the issues is where are we going to raise the money? And we had some discussion about that. And I think passing this resolution will be a tool for us that will actually help us raise the money. So thank you.
Okay. Alderman Vaccaro.
Yes, actually, because I'm in rules and engrossment at the same time. I just want to make sure add me as a co-sponsor. And if I leave this meeting, so I could, because my thing might be coming up in a minute, will you still have a quorum? Otherwise, I am fine with previous role.
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay, so I'm going to switch out. Please add me as a co-sponsor. And as long as you have a quorum, and I'm fine with previous role, okay?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Really, that's my only comment. I've been listening. So I got a resolution coming up, and I really got to spend some time over there.
I do understand. I appreciate your dual work there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a note that Alderman Boyd would like to also be a co-sponsor. And please add my name as well. Our next, Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I want to be a co-sponsor, but I'm not going to commit to that just yet. Alderman Rohde, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned, at the beginning of your presentation that, for the dense, development that you all are looking at doing in Cortex, right now, Cortex is mostly parking lots. They've got office buildings and obviously like the IKEA, but even half of the IKEA footprint is parking lots. I go over there fairly frequently, and BJC, has been building garages, but they're still like particularly in the middle of Cortex, just massive parking lots everywhere. So it's not very dense right now. I know that that's not part of the plan and not the direction that we would like to see it going in, and that there are plans for more office buildings and apartments and things of that nature. But when you look at the city as a whole, really Southeast City is where we have the most densely populated part of our city. And there really has not been a emphasis on good transportation policy in that part of our city, which I really struggle with, because there is a lot of low income households down there that would greatly benefit from better transportation policies. And the city has not been putting money or resources, neither has GRG or Bi-State, into improving infrastructure in that part of the city, when it is the most densely populated part of our region. And so I'm wondering how you believe this resolution is going to better improve that policy for areas like Southeast City.
Well, Alderman, I guess I would, and I'm looking for your support, so I'm going to be perhaps challenging a little bit of what you said. I know you've said that before, and I've never challenged you on it because, well, perhaps I should have. When you take a look at this, first off, I think you have to take a look at, when you talk about density, not just residential population, but also your daytime population. Just in the 17th ward, we have about 55,000 people that work in the 17th ward. That's about 25% of the city's working, 25% of the jobs that are located in the city are in the 17th ward. And in order for transit to work, it's the daily commute that really, the one-off trip, it's too one-off to really support sustained transit. What makes transit work is, somebody doing the same trip 5 days a week. And that's where you get your, the volume you need. So when you have massing of the jobs along the metro line, that's an opportunity to, when you have a whole lot of jobs in one place, to go ahead and start thinking about how to feed that location with access through, whether it's bus lines or transit or whatever. One of the genesis of Cortex, and I know I got the initial funding for it. It was actually my idea in many respects. Was that we had a large area of underutilized property that was right along the Metro Link that we thought we could acquire relatively inexpensively. And that after we acquired it, if we could get a Metrolink stop, the values would go up pretty dramatically, and we will increase the density. Today, in Cortex, there's approximately 5,000 jobs, a little over 5,000. The plan is ultimately to get to 15. The surface parking lots you see there today are largely, surface parking is an inexpensive way to hold land until you can develop it. And parking is our chief constraint over there. We could probably have more buildings built today if our parking ratios were two parking spots to 1,000 square feet instead of 4, which is what it is now. We can't even get financing on buildings in St. Louis unless you have 4 parking spots per 1,000. So that's part of it. But the fact that we do have the jobs there, and just adding Cortex to the WashU Medical Center, and this is probably 5 or 10-year-old data, we have 40,000 people a day that converge on that. You're not going to see, that's more people than converge in Clayton, for example, every day. With regard to the IKEA, yes, there's a lot of surface parking spots around IKEA. I think, in retrospect, if we think back about Cortex and where Cortex was when we agreed to do IKEA, IKEA was, I think everybody knew that when we signed up for the IKEA, that it was, that was not an urban project. What it was, though, it was a cash cow. And you're talking about $100 million a year of retail sales that is almost all net new for the city. I mean, when you're buying products in IKEA, there's very, very little, very little, cannibalization of other city retail sales. And that provided, frankly, funding to elevate IKEA, pay for the parking, and then also put in the new Metrolink stop in the park. There's a number of things that we were able to achieve with IKEA going in there. And I guess the last comment is even the residential density, we have a fair amount of daytime employment density, but the areas, there's 240 acres. The 240 acres I live in the middle of, which is Lindell on the north, Forest Park on the south, Kings Highway on the west, and Vanderbilt on the east. That 240 acres has about, 8,000 people living in it now, 8 to 9. So you have three-quarters of a ward's population in 240 acres. I mean, it is a pretty dense area when you start thinking about, the daytime population, and then what residential population there is over there is fairly dense. And I would suspect those 240 acres are probably the most dense, or among the most dense, residential population in the region. So I'm challenging you there, but my point is as those jobs grow better, the number of jobs that are in the central corridor, that is what's feeding the demand for the Grand bus line, which is the bus line that is the highest used bus line in the region. It has 10-minute headways. That was part of the change that has happened as a result of the Metro Reimagined. So, what really drives, I think, in my opinion, and I think it's, pretty established fact is, you increase ridership, you increase frequency, which then increases, demand, which then increases ridership. It becomes a self-fulfilling loop. So, we start massing more and more jobs, in the central corridor. That's what's going to fill up those bus lines. And that's not to say that we should not have an interest in doing, employment, in other parts of the city. It's just that there are some unique attributes in the central corridor that make it more attractive or more easy to develop the, the dense employment that, that requires lots of parking or transit. Long-winded answer. Alderman, you're on mute.
I've been having this conversation, I feel like, more and more regularly lately, but we can talk about dense employment centers and be talking about O'Fallon, Missouri. Citigroup and MasterCard are within a mile of each other and have 5,000 employees each at their suburban corporate campuses. You could argue that that's dense employment out there, even though it supports suburban sprawl and, the decentralization of our region. And both of them have very decent wage jobs and everything else. I don't know if you're able to see this, but I put a map up. I know the general boundaries of Cortex are probably a little bit larger than this. But I think that this is the area that most people consider when they hear Cortex. But you can clearly see from the satellite photo here that there's a huge amount of surface parking in that area. just tremendous amounts. I mean, if you look, I would venture to say almost 50% of that area is surface parking lot. You know, so, you know, to say that, you know, everyone who uses the Grand Line, or a majority of those that are using it, are doing so to access jobs that are in Cortex, or, you know, I think that that's also a fallacy. I think ridership there, part of it is because Grand is central to our city. So it's convenient. Part of that is also because Metro continues to reduce bus lines going elsewhere in the region. And so part of it is connectivity, because they have to access other bus lines that are accessible via Grand. And then, you know, I think lastly, we have the Metrolink station that's on Grand, that you're very aware of, you know, just south of Interstate 64. Which has connectivity out to the county and jobs out in the county as well. You know, so I hear you, and I understand, you know, kind of the narrative there, but, you know, to me, I feel like we often discount the contributions that the North and South Side provide to the Central Corridor, and the tax base that's there as well. You know, I understand, you know, companies, you know, generally through payroll tax and, you know, other things pay more and taxes, but they need people in order to even operate. And if we're not supporting people, you know, then, you know, whether that's through our education systems, our transportation infrastructure, you know, then companies don't want to be in a city that doesn't have decent transportation, you know, decent education, and, you know, a safe place for their people to be. And that's what we've continually struggled with for decades at this point in time. You know, so I want to ensure that, you know, if we are on the precipice of trying to establish and set a citywide transportation policy, that it is in fact, you know, taking into account the other parts of our city outside of the Central Corridor.
Well, Alderman, I guess I'm a little surprised. I actually thought that this was something that was good for other parts of the city. I thought the Central Corridor has been historically fairly blessed because we had this, the Metrolink running through it. Between downtown and what's happening, you know, in Cortex and, you know, the surrounding areas, that represents about 75% of the city's jobs. You know, I think I said in my remarks earlier, you know, trying to figure out how to take advantage of the proximity, the north-south proximity, the connectivity to those jobs, I think is a unique opportunity for the city. And if we did a better job of it, I think it's going to help those neighborhoods. You know, if you have low costs, right now, one of the great advantages of what's happening to Forest Park Southeast and the Central West End is the fact that there are lots of people in those neighborhoods that are now walking to work. And you know, the car ownership levels we're starting to see them kind of trend down a little bit. I can't say we have a great metrics on that. We haven't measured it yet, but I can tell you that the parking ratios when we build the newer buildings over there are bedroom to parking spot ratios are tighter than they've ever been. And if there is a way to begin thinking creatively about how to span these, you know, less car dependent neighborhoods into other parts of the city, I think it's a unique opportunity for us. And Scott wants to say something that looks like, did you, Scott?
Sure. So I think to Alderman Cohn's point, within the resolution, the idea of asset management and maintenance and equity, and figuring out how to have an adequate funding strategy for the whole city, those are definitely ideas that are embedded in this resolution. It is certainly much easier to fund, to maintain and fund new transportation infrastructure when you've got a lot of development or institutional uses. And however, the supply of ward capital has proven to not really be adequate to maintain the infrastructure we have throughout a lot of the city. And so I do think really a key component of this resolution, of the planning that would come from this resolution, is figuring out how to remedy that. And that's kind of in my mind, that's an essential component of what we would be looking at. And in addition, I think what's been really a challenge is like corridor wide planning. So for instance, Bi-State has made a big investment in the 70 line with electric buses, which will be online soon. I think there's a real opportunity for the city to come in and do a lot of infrastructure upgrades along Grand, sidewalks, bus shelters, connecting facilities to get people to that bus line. And this framework would be a way to formalize that as a desire. And that could be, from the north part of Grand, the whole Grand corridor could benefit from that because there's ridership along that whole corridor. And so part of this planning effort is setting priorities like that. And I think that's kind of an easy one to speculate on because we talk about it a lot. So I would certainly anticipate that would kind of get elevated within this planning process, but I think there's certainly others as well.
I guess my question is, and Alderman Rohde, I appreciate where you're coming from, and I certainly appreciate the context in which you're sharing all of this and the perspective. But my question was, how is this resolution addressing that equity? I mean, we just went through spending nearly $800,000 on an economic development plan that really wasn't a plan, in my opinion. The assessment part of that was completely non-existent, in my opinion. So SLDC spent, almost $800,000 on an economic development plan that probably won't do very much for economic development policy in the city. So what in this resolution is going to ensure equity across the city in terms of ensuring access to capital, access at the table in terms of decision making, or even ideas relative to improvements with respect to transportation and transportation policies? I'm just.
Well, I guess there's nothing probably in the resolution that's going to assure that, Alderman. I'm not going to be down there when the time comes to assure it. It's going to be through the budgeting process and the implementation. I'm not going to be down there. I think what we're looking for here is a collection of ideas, and we probably won't be able to fund all of them at once, but that's where it's going to be up to the board to set those priorities. But the potential, as an example, I started talking about community benefit agreements. What about we do a development in the central corridor? Maybe part of the community benefit agreement is the funding funding a bus route. Scott, Alderman Ogilvy actually participated in this discussion. We had a developer in my ward at one point that was interested in doing some affordable housing. It would require some additional subsidy, and we had a big discussion with the developer at the time. Is it more important for us to use affordable housing in a project in a very strong market area, or is it more important to go ahead and use that subsidy to begin stabilizing something that's more on the periphery? We didn't really resolve it, one way or the other. We frankly, that was part of the genesis of the whole idea of doing the affordable housing study. These are, I don't think they're appropriate. I didn't think it was appropriate for me to answer that question. I was asking the developer to get some guidance from the HUD's committee. But to kind of address the possibility of how you might deal with this is as we begin coordinating planning with transportation, with incentives, one of the things we might take a look at is you build a new project in the Central Corridor, how can we use some of the tax increment to better connect people from the neighborhoods to where the jobs are? And that may be, subsidized metro passes. It might be endowing a north-south bus route. I mean, there's any number of things that could do that, that you can do with that. I'm not going to be down there, but I think it's good to have, a shopping list ready, and then, leave it up to folks who will be down there in a year or two.
So I guess, and I don't want to belabor the conversation and take away time from my colleagues here, but, and I don't have the resolution in front of me. My computer the battery died, so it's charging currently. So who is responsible for this process? Is it SLDC or is it BPS? Because, certainly, a lot of capital projects go through that BPS planning process, but oftentimes it seems like there's a huge disconnect between BPS and other agencies and or even our own city agencies like SLDC. So, I mean, who ultimately is going to be accountable for, communication, coordination, et cetera?
Scott, you want to answer that a little bit? I know we had a number of conversations on whether it should be planning SLDC, and I don't know if we ended up with anyone's per se, and I don't have the resolution in front of me right now either. Scott?
Right. So at the end of the day, BPS is the agency that manages and administers capital funds and is responsible for bidding and permitting just about everything that happens within our right of way. So I think BPS ends up with a lead role in implementation and in reporting. I think the development of the plan, you pull in a lot more stakeholders than just BPS. But because, capital flows through BPS, and they have the sort of apparatus to engage with aldermen and engage with external stakeholders on projects. I think they really have a key role in managing and implementing the results of the study.
Is that actually in the resolution?
It is not. I mean, so BPS participation in working on the study is in the resolution. I think that it would be maybe slightly premature to establish exactly the roles and responsibilities for everybody in the resolution itself. I think the planning effort assigns roles and responsibilities. And I think in terms of actual transportation infrastructure, BPS is going to, loom large in implementing it, but there would be other recommendations as well. There should be policy recommendations that are probably implemented by SLDC. There could be zoning, land use regulations that are going to be pursued by planning and zoning department. So I do think there'll be a division of responsibilities for the final plan, but I don't see any way around BPS, really having a key implementation role. And I do think that that will be a little bit of a shift for, how they currently approach things, I think.
Well, and that's a concern for me, one, that it's not spelled out in the resolution. And I understand that, the intent is to have it worked out through, kind of the planning process, if you will. But, as an example, and I know, Alderman Ogilvie is very familiar with this, but, we've been working on a Louisiana Calm Street project for the better part of a decade now. We were able to get we broke it out into 3 different phases. We've got the first phase, funded and, moved through approval process, including, Missouri Department of Natural Resources and other entities. But as we're going through the planning process for the Brick Line, There's literally no connectivity to that, even though the Louisiana Calm Street project ends literally where they're trying to, kind of create connectivity in that central corridor. So we're probably going to end up spending $5 million on, something that doesn't go anywhere and could potentially connect to another project that's going on. BPS was aware of both of them, but BPS did not connect the dots between the two, which is concerning to me, that it requires aldermanic intervention when it should be part of a planning process. Why wouldn't we bring people who are at the table together to have conversations around how to make these projects interact with one another? To me, I feel like I'm at a point in my career here 12 years later, and Alderman Rhodey, I know you have a few more years on me, that we need to spell these things out for people, otherwise they aren't going to happen.
Right, and I think one issue you touch on there is that BPS is not operating with a citywide list of priorities. We have those in a few locations, like the Project Connect area, where we've been working through, like the biggest priorities to the middle priorities and funding them one at a time. And I think that's been very successful in that area. And you're going to see a ton of construction, over the next couple of years. But we don't have a similar framework citywide. So I do think sometimes BPS has a hard time figuring out, what the priorities should be in that frame, in the current framework. And I think the planning effort through this resolution would be a big step in the right direction in correcting that. Although I do think that you don't just make a plan and it doesn't change over time. But the sort of the gap in interagency cooperation and alignment that I think you point out is partially the result of the city or BPS not operating under sort of a mutually agreed upon prioritization of what we're going to do.
Gentlemen, can I,
Okay.
Alderman Collin, may I interject for just a moment?
Well, and Madam Chair, I'm actually finished with my questioning. So
okay.
But I do want to, just on a personal note, if you all could please excuse my appearance this morning. I've been retiling my bathroom shower, so I've actually had to be going 2 doors down to take a shower in the morning, and had a triple homicide this morning that I've been dealing with my constituents with as well. And so I have not had sufficient time this morning to put on a nice collared shirt or anything to that effect. So my apologies.
We truly accept and understand. Well, thank you, sir. Before we move on to the next alderperson, very quickly, because Alderman Cone, I think, had some good thoughts there. And one of the things that I know that we have never had with the city is to have the appropriate connections in implementation. And so this planning process that brings everybody to the table and can hopefully put a plan together that directs how these things will happen. I think if we try to do it in a resolution, we're getting ahead of ourselves, and then we would not have had the opportunity for everybody to have input. But I think that this will take place, and I do understand his concerns. So can we go on to our next alderperson? Alderman Muhammad, are you still with us?
I am, and I have no questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Alderman Oldenburg, I don't think he ever came on, no. Alderwoman Middlebrook. I saw her come in and out.
Good morning. I have no questions at this time, but I would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Also, I see that Alderwoman Navarro, you have your hand up. Go right ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I'll be very brief. As I indicated right before we got online, I'd also like to be added as a co-sponsor, and I just want to say I very much support this planning effort. And I know, as Alderman Rhodey indicated, that he unfortunately is not going to be here later to see this study through. I just want to be on the record as saying I'm committed to seeing this study and want to be engaged in whatever ways I can and be supportive for as long as I am at the Board of Aldermen. So I'm grateful to see that this initiative is going, and I know that I can think of a lot of neighborhoods that would really benefit from this, and I really appreciate the interconnectedness between transportation and development incentives as well as environmental health. I just think there's a lot to really be pulled together in this type of planning effort. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Alderman Gunther, I think he left. Yeah, he left. Alderwoman Rice. Alderwoman Rice, did you have any questions? Okay, we'll move on. I just wanted to add very briefly that everything that we've been talking about, most especially the last 3 years, is putting priority to the north-south district and having improvement for transportation. And I don't think anybody is going to allow us to get past that. I think that's going to be the number one priority as we look at this in this planning process, is to make sure that that north-south connection is appropriate. So I'm looking forward to that. And I do know that I needed to thank um, Scott Ogilvie for working with my residents and others as they're working on different projects. The various neighborhoods that are working on calming initiatives and all that, it takes a moment because number one, we don't necessarily have the resources to put there, but we do have Great Rivers and others who are in planning processes, know more, can help residents and also get them involved in the big picture. So I do appreciate all of you and what you've been doing and looking forward to the future.
If it's not already obvious, I might be the sponsor, but it's actually our former colleague who's done most of the drafting of this and the legwork and everything. So, I also want to acknowledge Scott's contribution in those areas.
Oh, I thank you for doing that too. So if we have no more questions, Alderman Rhodey, would you like to close on your resolution?
I probably have talked enough. I ran off a couple of the other folks who were sitting in there, so I'll not say anymore.
All right. Well, the chair will entertain a motion for resolution number 91.
I move to pass resolution 91 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous roll.
All right, it's been moved and second with the previous roll. Was Alderman Muhammad on the previous roll?
Yep. Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. So I think that we have done something very good for this city to move forward. It's much needed, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to be supportive in any way possible. And hopefully the city can also get itself reorganized. I just had a conversation this morning about all the various different committees that we have. It's confusing for people. And I'm not talking about Board of Aldermen committees. I'm talking about the various other boards and commissions and different things that we have. It's confusing to the public and sometimes belaboring and delaying for momentum for our efforts here in the city. But I'm not going to get on that platform because I could be on it for a moment. But I thank everybody for coming to this, and I'm going to close it out. We don't have any, does anybody have any other discussion for this committee? Alderwoman Navarro, did you have something else you need to say?
No, I'm sorry. I should have lowered my hand from before.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any announcements from this committee? I wanted to announce that I thank everybody, all of my committee members for all your hard work this session. And I think it's going to be even more challenging on the next one. And we just got to be prepared to help move this city forward. And I want to thank everybody for that. If there's no other discussion, no other questions, could we move to adjourn our meeting?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Move for adjournment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been moved to adjourn our meeting, and I thank everybody. Be safe and healthy.
Thank you. You as well.
All right, bye-bye.